And our ENCA's Masego has been tracking that story for us and joining us now. Masego, this is a very, very important story. In all of the stories we've covered at our various universities, accommodation has repeatedly come up as an issue. Affordable accommodation and just the number of it. How did we get to this point that these universities will now have these buildings handed over to them?
Well, first of all, the problem is that, the students keep rising. The number of students in South Africa keeps rising. So that's, first of all, what government and the institutions, including Wits University, your University of Pretoria and TUT have been saying they're finding a problem with, because previously, of course, there were less pupils, or rather less people going into university spaces, and colleges there were not so many TVET colleges as well. So that's where the first problem was. But what happened was, remember those 2015-2016 fees must fall. Those are the big protests by students, and that's what actually triggered government to establish, first of all, the then Minister of Higher Education, Bladen Zimande, established a task team that would look at old and abandoned government buildings which have always existed, and people have complained about that. What are we doing with this building and that building and there? So that's what's happening. And in 2017, one of the buildings, actually around September, was given. It was an old nurses' home in Johannesburg. It was given to Wits University, and that helped. But it didn't alleviate so much of the pressure. We're still seeing students sleeping in libraries, sleeping in SRC offices,
or crashing on the floor of their friends.
Exactly. Or some of them actually in police stations. For instance, in Durban, apparently there's students who even end up sleeping at police stations just so they could get education. So the government, along with the private sector, they actually called on to help from the private sector, because government doesn't have enough money to actually renovate these buildings. A lot of them are in decay. They are actually in really bad state. You can see huge cracks through those buildings, and they really need proper renovations for the safety of those students. So they roped in the private sector, and this is obviously the Department of Infrastructure Development, and then they roped in the university as well, and that's how they identified some of these unused buildings.
Any talk at the moment that this is the kind of approach that will be taken elsewhere, or even more so in Gauteng? Because as you've just said, the need is huge. Yes,
the need is very big. And actually earlier this week, the Premier, David Makhura, gave away a building to UNISA to build another accommodation for students in Johannesburg. And he's actually saying that he's going to identify land as well, where buildings can also be erected. So that's much needed, but of course the students are asking why now.
Yeah. So why now?
So of course, election year.
Yeah.
We are voting in just a little bit more than a month's time. So the students feel like, okay, yes, you have done this, but this time it's 5 buildings.
And can we see the follow-up?
And can we actually see the follow-up? But of course, the university is very appreciative, especially Wits University.
I'm sure.
Yeah, their student foot count is growing massively, and they really appreciate this. They're just saying that they're waiting for the paper from government, signed paper saying, here, this is your building, here are your keys.
And indeed, the more of those unused government buildings that can be put to good use, the better, I would assume, even though we're quite cynical about the timing of it. Masego bringing us the very latest on what we believe is a good news story, good impact for students.